on the geek side where we are diving into once again the Silmarillion. But before we do that, I am here with my friend Skep.
Hey, everybody.
And the ever lovable Sage.
Hi.
And before we get into, the discussion of the Silmarillion and where we left off last time, we do have some somber news because news came out on the 16th of this month that Christopher Tolkien passed away.
Yeah, tragic. I would say we should start with a minute of silence, but that's perhaps not exactly the wisest thing to do in a spoken word podcast situation. But yeah, this is tremendously sad. While the professor, of course, Tolkien, it's difficult to underestimate Christopher's influence on the Legendarium. Tolkien invented everything and wrote out everything, but a lot of things were discussed with Christopher. Christopher Tolkien helped him edit stuff. He helped him create the maps, the original maps in the in the Lord of the Rings was Christopher. And while he is sometimes being accused of the Silmarillion is basically Christopher Tolkien's book. The original manuscript that Tolkien left was a bunch of unconnected hodgepodge of various documents and timelines, often contradictory and never finished. Christopher was the one who weaved them together into a sort of coherent narrative.
Very well put.
And made various decisions like who was Gil-galad's father, who was Fingon in regarding to other people, etc.
In fairness, in his lifetime, J.R.R. Tolkien referred to Christopher as my chief collaborator and editor.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point I want to make. Yes, J.R.R. Tolkien's name is on the Silmarillion, and yes, everything was there he wrote. Christopher has said that 80%, I think 75% of the text in the Silmarillion is Tolkien's work, with 25% is him and Guy Gabriel Kay creating bridging texts in order to make the admittedly somewhat shaky, coherent narrative into something that can actually work.
Yeah.
He has been blamed from that from time to time that he messes with Tolkien's work, blah 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 blah. First of all, as Skep says, Tolkien himself considered Christopher. If Tolkien could have appointed a literary heir, it would have been Christopher.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that whatsoever.
No doubt about it.
And secondly, while the Lord of the Rings had, of course, become wildly popular through, shall we say, the especially the hippie embrace of the 60s, without Christopher and his Silmarillion writings and his history, especially his history of Middle-earth, the
shaping
tales,
the shaping of
Middle-earth, everything, there wouldn't be a Tolkien legendarium if we knew it. If you read through The Lord of the Rings today and got to the appendices, or just took some of the references, got to the appendices. I know the appendices dealing with the First Age in The Lord of the Rings is not very long, but you wouldn't have the faintest freaking clue who Morgoth was, or what Beleriand was, or what Aman was, or even Arendelle.
Yeah.
Even Arendelle, when we get to the when I first read The Lord of the Rings and we got to Rivendell and we had a very long poem from Bilbo about Arendelle, I didn't have a clue who he was either, and such it was for most people. The point is, these days, people can read that stuff and get an appreciation of why it was rather cheeky of Bilbo to make a poem about Arendelle in the House of Elrond, and why it was actually a rather spectacular thing that the elves seem to think it was really well done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Arendelle, by the way, is Elrond's father, who he hasn't seen for 6,000 years, just in case anyone missed why it might have been cheeky.
Now,
Right.
I want to say something a little bit about that because there wasn't always the Silmarillion.
No.
It was published, I think, in the late
77. 77.
And I remember being in college from 1970 to 74, and we were all Lord of the Rings devotees. We loved it. Peter Beagle was our Gilgalad. We read his column, in news sheets, printed news sheets that we passed around to one to another when he was living in Britain and writing about the Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
But he was talking about something called the Silmarillion, and that was like this holy thing that was going to come out and just be amazing. But it was unpublished at the time, and I just remember the sense of I wanted to read the Silmarillion so badly it was almost bursting inside of me. I was so frustrated by that, and I bought the first of many copies. As soon as it came out, as soon as it came to the United States.
Yeah,
We are all sorry, Maddie.
And for the people that sit there and they criticize Christopher for the Silmarillion, it's as somebody like me who is actually currently doing world building for her own series of novels and stuff. It is a process of brainstorming and sketching timelines here and sketching out key characters and key instances and trying to fit them in the world and when they happened, and maps are constantly evolving and timelines are ever changing. So I could just imagine the daunting task that Christopher had going back over his father's notes, trying to put it into a book that was cohesive and easy to follow, because I go back and look on my notes now and go, okay, why did I put that there? That doesn't go there.
Not to mention the fact that a lot of Tolkien's notes were handwritten, and I have seen his handwriting. It was not the easiest to follow.
Yes, I have that book too. Yes, his handwriting was awful. And plus,
his handwriting was almost as catastrophic as mine.
He would make a note that would start in one place, and then it would just stop, and then it would continue in another place without any context, and you just had to know that this was the finish of this other note that started earlier on possibly some other page.
It was almost like his deficit disorder.
his way of amending text was writing the text in pencil, then writing over it with red ink if he thought something should be changed, then writing over that in green ink because he thought of something else. So my point is, there are points that could be made about Christopher maybe putting too much of himself in places in the Silmarillion where Tolkien hasn't intended it. He takes that up himself and chastises himself various places in the history of Middle-earth. His 12 volume book basically about Tolkien's development of the Legendarium. But there wouldn't be a Tolkien Legendarium without Christopher Tolkien. He did the best work anyone could have done, and we owe him almost as much as we owe the professor himself.
And so here's the wonderful thing about this is, for those of us, because that's how we started out the series, criticizing the trilogy. Over here in the article, it says in 2017, Tolkien stepped down as a director of the Tolkien estate and Tolkien Trust, saying at the time that Beren and Luthien would likely be his final book. Tolkien was a staunch critic of Peter Jackson's adaptation of his father's trilogy, telling Le Monde in 2012 that they gutted the book, making it an action movie for 15 to 25-year-olds, and it looks like The Hobbit will be the same.
I mean, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Tolkien would probably have said the same.
Mm-hmm.
I say, as I did, I love the movies, and I don't think we could have gotten a better adaptation at the time.
Yeah.
But again, this is why I'm so enjoy working with Skep. My inner spirit animal is a grumpy old reactionary man.
It sounds like me.
So exactly. So Christopher is near and dear to my heart, even despite his and again, you cannot underemphasize the efforts he have made to coordinate, and just collect all the notes and stuff about what Tolkien did, and keep it in public knowledge.
Keep it in public knowledge, keep it current, make it interesting, and he made it coherent. And as a special case of that, I would like to point everyone to the Children of Hurin. He really formed that novel. Christopher Tolkien did very much. I know that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote the story, and it's one of the. A lot of people say it's one of the three great tales of the First Age.
Well, it is.
But it really is to form what Tolkien gave him, to take what Tolkien gave him and to make as good a work as the Children of Hurin turned out to be, to me, was just this side of a miracle. This side of a miracle.
I agree. The same thing with a lot of other stuff he did.
I just point that out as an example. Just as one example.
We're probably not going to stick too much with Christopher going forward, but rest in peace, Christopher. We owe you tremendous debts.
Life well lived, buddy.
Yeah, and we are very happy you did what you did.
He's in the halls of Mandos now.
Yeah, definitely chatting with his dad, probably.
Yep.
And the rest of the Inklings. We'll get to the Inklings later. I'm not going to open that particular can of worms.
Are we going to have that discussion now?
No, we're not.
Dude, one can at a time. Okay.
I mean, but again, I understand what you mean. I just want to say one thing before we move. I understand what you mean regarding when the Silmarillion came out. It was before my time, but I had the same feeling regarding various parts of the history, especially when I got old enough to read it. I would make the simile that we know what it later became, although, of course, in modern days, even those have been somewhat redeemed. But I will make the simile that it was like when the original when the Star Wars prequels came out. The whole concept has perhaps been muddled a bit because of the anti-hype that grew up about it, especially after Red Letter Media got its hands on Phantom Menace. But when the first prequel was set to come out, those who haven't lived it, as the three of us, of course, all did, will have difficulty remember just how palpable the excitement was in those days.
Yep.
No,
I mean, and it's worth remembering that when the Phantom Menace first came out, it was a smashing success. For the first year or so, everyone loved it. Yeah, there were comments about Jar Jar Binks, etc., etc. But as a general rule, 90% of the fan base adored Phantom Menace the first year or so.
I don't want you to think ill of me. I actually think the three prequels were the last three good works.
Oh, I agree. I don't particularly like Attack of the Clones, even though I have said good things about certain things that someone else have. But the prequels are much, much better than their reputation. They suffered because the anti-hype got just as popular as the popularity would have been. It became popular to dunk on them.
Right, absolutely.
It became the thing to do.
Was. Yeah.
I suspect that as we go further, unless Disney takes a very long break again, the prequels are going to be seen in a very positive light compared to what else is coming out.
Oh,
anyway,
the direct that's come out, but let's not go down there.
Yeah. Anyway, not Star Wars right now, but goodbye, Christopher. Rest in peace. Sleep well, man.
Yeah. There isn't a premiere date as yet for those of us that are eagerly awaiting the Lord of the Rings TV show on Amazon Prime. But they are targeting a 2021 debut for the series. Okay.
Yeah.
it has had its casting problems. It has had a hiatus and stuff because of writing and things of that nature. And as those of you that have watched my video, some people are clamoring about the cast. Well, the thing is this, and this restores tentative. To me, it gives me a glimmer of hope because it says sticking to canon. I hate the fact they call us purists, but I guess purists we are. Tolkien purists can breathe a sigh of relief as Amazon's deal for the rights to the Lord of the Rings series reportedly include quite a few rules regarding the show's faithfulness to the source material. Speaking to the German Tolkien Society, Tolkien scholar and series supervisor Tom Shippey indicated that the Tolkien estate has veto power over any content in the series that does not correspond with the author's vision for the saga.
I like that. Like I said, I'm fond of that. That is just, in fact, in Christopher Tolkien's spirit. Mm-hmm. I don't want to talk too much about the series. You made a great video about it. We don't need to go direct people to that. We don't need to go into any deep speculation. Because we don't actually know anything.
Well, I would just like to say that the casting of Meghan Markle as Gothmog is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
No, the thing I wanted to talk about regarding the fact that it's set in the Second Age, apparently, also, in my opinion, is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Although
potentially redeeming, I'm not that hopeful as you
are.
Although,
if they seem to be setting it in Numenor, which seems very weird to me.
Uh-oh.
But I mean, I suppose it's meant to be in the last years with our Fatherstone being corrupted. I still think this is
you can start it there. You can start it there, but if they end it there, it's going to be a piece of garbage. It's going to be.
We don't know if it's going to be a piece of garbage. We don't. Even if it ends there, it could end with Isildur and his dad escaping. There are many possibilities. We don't know anything. I'm just saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Cautious about it. I don't want to make judgment calls regarding garbage just yet.
If they have years and years of material, and it all takes place on Numenor, it's not going to be very good because there just isn't enough material.
I'm not going to say it's garbage, but I'm worried.
Yeah,
I'm practicing.
I mean, it may start there, but I think with over 3,400 years in the Second Age, I don't think it's going to stay there.
Well, like I said, it all depends on when they are actually going to be placing it.
Yeah.
If they're placing it at the very last years of the Second Age, it almost has to be there. Personally, I would still put it back with the First War, just after the forging of the One. But we don't know anything, so speculating right now is pointless. What I want to say something about is a specific point about the writing quality. Something we didn't really discuss back when we went over The Lord of the Rings, but which is, in my opinion, a fairly relevant point. Mm-hmm. Namely, the fact that we have discussed Tolkien's skill with writing many times. Mm-hmm. But because, I mean, we raged about this with The Hobbit, that as always they were bad when they went outside of what Tolkien did, and in The Hobbit they did that a lot. Yes. In this thing they have to when it comes to writing and dialogue and so on, go completely outside of Tolkien, and I am afraid that there is not going to be anyone who's going to be able to even if the dialogue is good, even if the story is good, Tolkien's works rely on a certain mood, and the style of dialogue and the style of the way people speak and the narrative is very much is very much reliant on that mood and creating that mood. And I am afraid that these people are either going to go high saga, which no one can write these days. Tolkien imitated saga speech for people like Boromir and Aragorn, but he didn't go full saga, or they're going to go full contemporary, which is, again, gonna take me out of it.
Yeah.
One thing Tolkien was very good at, like I said, we never discussed this, but I want to just mention it now, and then Skep can have his wicked ways with my argument. Like I said, people like Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, and the others in the books, we're talking books here, are speaking in a very archaic tone. Also archaic language from time to time, but primarily a very archaic saga-esque tone. And then we have the hobbits, who are basically contemporary, though they basically speak like Englishmen would in Tolkien's childhood, in the Edwardian era. But the two things, now, that has been done in other books before, and in other works before, but connecting the two in the same work is truly difficult. Tolkien managed to do it, in my opinion, because he didn't create them as opposites. It wasn't like two different worlds colliding. I mean, the hobbits were isolated and homebodies, but they were still very much an integrated part of the wider world. This is why, in my opinion, it worked, because it was just the way these people spoke.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, either by direct narrative or by winkings from the author, called attention to it. And this is, again, one of those things where I think Tolkien is an amazing, amazing writer. And I am just worried if these particular writers are able to pull the same tightrope line or walk the same tightrope.
Yeah.
Because in Tolkien's world, the tone and mood is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
I have to wait and see.
Let's see. Jason Todd writes, I want them to go more with the practical effects than CGI for the show because I prefer the look of Lord of the Rings to The Hobbit.
Again, it depends on what they are doing. It's not that I disagree. If we are going to see a great battle between Sauron and the Númenóreans, we are going to have to rely on CGI. If it's going to be a series set in much smaller, like the Travels of the Nine, like of the Fellowship, only, early and without the ring, then hell yeah, as much practical effects as humanly possible. However, it's also worth noticing that things have changed quite a bit dramatically in television over the last couple of years. 20 years ago, doing everything with CGI was impractical and expensive. Now it's actually rather more cheaply than doing everything with practical effects and
high school
extras.
High school students are doing effects.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
it's amazing the stuff that's happening.
I don't disagree that I would prefer practical effects for as much as possible. I always will, but I don't know if it can be completely avoided.
It cannot,
depending on what they want to achieve.
No, there are some things. There are some things that you have to have effects for. It's either too expensive or quite impossible to achieve the effect.
I mean, if nothing else, let's say Sauron actually appears. In the original trilogy, before The Hobbit, in the movies, Sauron, when he appears either very shortly or in clear CGI scenes. Yeah. I don't want a practical effect Sauron because it's going to look wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't want, if there is elves involved, I don't want everything an elf does to be CGI'd because they need to be, as elfy as elvishly possible.
Yeah, we have our feelings about what is Sauronish and what is elvish in our minds, based on what we've been exposed to, and we want more. We want confirmation of the same. If we were met with a CGI version of Sauron that looked very much like an Alan Lee illustration, that might be very beautiful, but it would be so different from what we're accustomed to identifying Sauron that we would reject it. It wouldn't feel real, even though Alan Lee's illustrations, and if you don't know who he is, you're in for a treat. Just Google Alan Lee illustrator and look at the images.
But I mean,
you can thank me later.
Like I said, I don't disagree. I'm just saying practical effects and CGI these days has to be seen as one of the same, in my opinion. And what we have to do is use what fits best the mood of the given scene.
Yes, and also most important is what confirms my personal prejudices.
Of course, always. But the idea that CGI is anything but another tool in the filmmakers or TV producers' arsenal, I think, is counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway,
for those of you wondering what's on the screen now, it's one of Alan Lee's works. I don't own that. That's not mine. I'm putting that out there now. I'm just sharing that with everybody.
Oh, that's a picture of Gondolin on the right. That's Gondolin. Yeah,
actually, far more important, because we discussed this last week or the week before. The week before is the picture on the left, because we discussed the fact that the Ainur or the Valar are not really elemental spirits as they are sometimes portrayed. And I was speaking about this particular image because this is one of the few times we actually see Ulmo, and he takes the shape of a very large man made of water rising out of the ocean. I just wanted to make sure that is not what the Valar actually is. That was a choice made by Ulmo to take that particular shape in that particular moment in order to have a conversation with Tuo.
He had just seen the movie Batman.
Basically, yes.
Sorry.
But anyway, shall we? I think we have tread water enough in the others.
Mm-hmm.
So shall we get on with it, so to speak?
Yeah. Okay. We left off with the fact that Aule had created the dwarves, and they were put to sleep because nothing can wake up before the firstborn, who are the elves. I think that's where we left off with last week.
We left off specifically after Melkor had been captured and brought in chains to be held in the prison of Mandos for 3 Valinorian ages, and Orome had taken the 3 elven ambassadors to Valinor to say, hey, look, this is what it has. Convince your people to come over here. Anyway, so that's basically what happened. I think today we're not actually going to get... I don't actually think we're going to get very much in the way done in the way of narrative. Because I think what we need to do now is deal only with the Great Voyage and talk about the divisions of the elves, which is complicated. Well, it's not super complicated, but it's complicated enough without a spreadsheet. Maddie, do you think you can find the divisions of the elves spreadsheet somewhere?
Hang on, let me Google it. Let me see.
And because this is going to be important later, especially the division between the Eldar and the Moriquendi, and to a certain degree the Grey Elves.
The Grey Elves.
Let's just see if Maddie can find the. Anyway,
this
is exactly what I am looking for. Yes, thank you.
There you go.
Welcome.
In the early days, like I said, before they were found by Orome, the elves just called themselves the Quendi. As I remember, and my my Elvish is not superbly good these days, but if I remember correctly, Quendi basically means the speakers, or something like that, as most people have a tendency to name themselves something in that order.
Yeah.
Okay, at this point, the elves have been. The three ambassadors have come back from Valinor. They have the light of the trees in their eyes, and they are basically telling their people, "You got to come and see this, guys. This is so freaking awesome." This place under the trees and under the stars and everything, this is cool enough, but you have got to come over there and live with these people. Please, 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 please. Especially since we are going back and we don't want to go alone.
Not everybody was convinced.
Nope. But at this point, the elves consisted basically of three loose tribes. The smaller tribe, which was basically tall and blonde, and especially focused on art and poetry. The second tribe, which was also tall and dark-haired, and focused primarily on making things. And the last tribe, the greatest tribe, the first tribe was the smallest, the second second biggest, so to speak, and the third one, the very largest, who was of average size for elves, which means a little bit bigger than humans, and usually brown or gray-haired. The three ambassadors belonged to one of these tribes each. They were, as we mentioned last time, Ingvi, Finvi, and Elvi. And up until this time, the elves had probably been living in loose confederacies or under loose chieftains, if they even had anything resembling rulers. It's difficult to say because they were a hunter-gatherer community without enemies. So how much they would have needed a strong ruler is up for debate. But at this point, they actually elected their first rulers, and that was for those who went away, because all of the first tribe decided to follow their ambassador. The grand majority of the second tribe decided to follow their ambassador. We're talking probably 80 to 90%. And again, a majority of the third agreed to follow their ambassador, but a lot remained. Those who left called themselves later the Eldar. This is where the term comes from. The people of the stars. And they were divided into the three great houses, the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri. We will get back to those later, but let's first take the Avari. The Avari, or the Mori Quendi, as they are also called, are the ones we call the Dark Elves in Tolkien's Legendarium.
Can I make a comment about the creation of the elves?
If you so desire.
You know, the way that I think of it is, if you think of in the creation of the elves, Varda, when she lit off the bright stars above Middle Earth, that's when they received the Mirror of Cuivinnen, the Water of Awakening, right?
The Water of Awakening Cuivinnen is a bay at the inland sea of Helgar. Right, that was basically just where they woke up.
Yeah, that was the location where they went from, or at least that's the way that I learned it.
Yeah,
and those were the Quendi, right? And when they came into being, the first thing that they thought about was the light of these new stars. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what leads to their love of starlight best, and obviously their worship of Varda.
Yeah.
And don't they call her Elentari or something like that, the Queen of the Stars?
Yeah, Elentariel, I think.
Okay.
And Elbereth, which is cinderized as Elbereth.
Cinderized is right. That's right. That's where Elbereth comes from.
We will get back later, guys, to what Sindar is. It's a language, but we'll get back to that a little bit later today, actually. Not tomorrow, not anything, but today.
So anyway, I just thought it was worth noting a couple of things about how they were created, and that stars are extremely important to them.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly this is a good point, because those who remained and didn't go to Valinor is called the Moriquendi or the Avari. The Moriquendi means the Dark Elves, the Avari means the unwilling, because they were unwilling to go on the trip. But when we say the Dark Elves, it's worth mentioning that this is not Dungeons and Dragons. These are not evil. Some of them can be evil, just as some of the light elves or high elves can be evil. Feanor, I'm looking at you. But they are not evil. They are just some for whom the love of, starlight under the trees were more important than the tales of the far off fluorescent trees.
Yeah.
So they remained, and the Avari basically goes out of Tolkien's stories. We don't actually hear much about them except for one, and a fellow by the name of Eöl, who will become important in probably 7 or 8 shows when we get to the story of the parentage of Erendil. But that'll be ages from now. But the Avari goes out of the stories to a certain degree. What they are interesting in, however, is that they were they were specifically mentioned to be the first of the elves to make contacts with the later humans. When humans first arose, the Avari was the first ones to get in contact with them and teach them about, the world they were living in. So they are important because of what they gave the humans later, who could otherwise basically have had orcs as their first teachers, which would have been catastrophic, I believe we can all agree upon. Mm-hmm. But because the story is about what happened in Valinor and afterwards, they are not really told very much about. But apparently they were originally something like 25% of the original elven race that chose to remain as this hunter-gatherer, in this hunter-gatherer tribal lifestyle in Middle-earth, while the rest left. Now, the others then spent something on the average probably of about 1,000 years trudging across the continent. It's mentioned that they went slowly and paused a lot on the way, and basically whenever Orome had something to do, like he had to go home or something, they would stop and wait for him. However, at this point, like I said, the tribes took their names and elected their first kings, probably because now there were, if not danger, then at least hardship of the travel. The Vanyar, the light elves, if you will, tall, blonde, elegant, picked Yngvi, their ambassador, as the king. Yngvi is the High King of Elves. Yngvi supposedly still lives, because elves are immortal, and he went into Valinor. And he is and will always be at least titular High King of all elves. The second tribe, the Noldor, is the most important in the stories going forward, while the Tillery delivered quite a few important characters. Basically, everything that happens in Tolkien's Legendarium is because of the actions of the Noldor from this moment out. Their ambassador was named Finvi, and he then became their king. The Tillery was a great tribe, a much bigger tribe than the others, something like twice as big as the other two tribes put together. So they were much too big for a single king, but their primary king was their ambassador Elvi and his brother Ulvi. Yes. These names sounds weird, but they have meaning in the Legendarium. I just cannot be bothered looking up what the actual names mean at the moment, because I'm too far from my copy of the Elven to English dictionary. However, moving along, the elves were moving towards were moving towards the west, heading towards the Great Sea that they were told would be there, at which point they would be brought over to Valinor. After a while, though, they came across a giant mountain range, a huge range of jagged and hostile mountains forever wreathed in great snow. And they were afeared. Orome was not with them at the moment, and they paused. This was the Hithaglir, which I think is, a puppy.
Yeah, she's been a lap baby for the past 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. Which I think is a great name for it. The Hithaglir is basically the Misty Mountains. The elves have now traveled from the far east of the continent. If you take it from these days, they would probably have traveled from somewhere in Siberia until somewhere in Europe, basically. The Misty Mountains, of course, doesn't really exist in real life, but back then, this was ages and ages and ages ago, these mountains have been raised by Melkor directly to prevent the ride of Orome. And they were very tall, and they were very dangerous, and people were worried about getting over them. Now, they paused there for a while, but eventually the Vanyar and the Noldor pushed across them and into Eriador. Depending on where they came over them, it is absolutely possible that they actually came down in and around Rivendell. Now, Rivendell would, of course, not be in any way relevant until much later. I just find it somewhat amusing that if they actually passed over the High Pass, they would probably have come down around where Rivendell is. If they had passed a bit further down, we don't know when Durin first started chiseling out Moria, but theoretically they could have encountered him there, though of course we know that they didn't. Some of the Teleri, and this is where things start getting confusing, because some of the Teleri at this point said, nope, this is not good, we're not going to do this, this voyage is okay, but yeah, we've had enough. And so under a leader called Lenvi, who would later become their king, a large group splintered from the main group of the Teleri and went south following the Anduin. These particular Teleri would later evolve into the forest elves of Legolas people and the original inhabitants of Lothlorien, etc., etc. Remember these people, the people of Lenve who went south during the along the Anduin. The other Teleri eventually also pushed across the Misty Mountains and came into Eriador. The elves then moved on and pushed across the Blue Mountains, who were at the time not nearly as tall and frightening. Then again, they hadn't been reared by Melkor specifically to prevent the ride of a Valar. So this is probably basically why the Misty Mountains are so huge and even evil from time to time. Cruel Redhorn. As mentioned in the book. It's probably because Melkor actually rose the damn thing from the ground up, and some of his malice still lingers there. But eventually, all of them pushed across Eriador and into Beleriand. Now, Beleriand is not on any map you will have seen if you have only watched The Lord of the Rings. Guys, we have lost Skep. It seems that he is going to have to deal with his grandchildren. So, apologies for that. He will probably be back later.
Okay.
Where were we? Okay, they pushed in, but Beleriand was basically another part of the Great Middle-earth continent, almost as big as the entire thing we already see. And the western border was the Blue Mountains that in the Lord of the Rings are basically the farthest north western border. Or the eastern border is basically what became the western border. So everything that's going on from now on, when I talk about Beleriand, Maddie, can you find a map about Middle-earth with Beleriand?
I'm looking. I was looking.
Mm-hmm. Beleriand is where all the good stuff takes place during the Silmarillion. So this is why this is important, even if those who have only read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! This is Beleriand, and the mountain range all the way across to the to the right, is beyond that is the map of the Lord of the Rings as we know it. The Shire is about an inch or so to the right of this map. Just so people have an idea of what we are talking about here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the group pushed in to Beleriand and eventually came to the shores of the Great Ocean. Now, at this point, the Valar had gotten a bit ahead of themselves because they didn't really have any way of transporting anyone. So Ulmo basically had to bring up an entire island from the seabed and have people get onto that to draw them across to Valinor. However, this took time. And this is where the other separation of the Teleri happened, because you remember me talking about their main king, Elve. Well, he managed to, while he was waiting, he went exploring, and he went into the forest of Neldoreth, which you see right in the middle where it says Doriath of the map we currently have. And there he met Melian. You will remember Melian from last time and the time before as a Maya spirit who was dwelling in Middle-earth. And apparently she showed herself for Elve, and he became entranced by her, fell deeply, deeply in love with her, and married her. The thing is, he didn't seem to have told anyone about this, so he was in the forest of Neldoreth, and none of his people knew where the heck he was. So they were looking for him. So when Ulmo first put the elves on board the great island and drew them across the ocean, well, most of the Teleri wasn't there. Noldor and the Vanya went across the ocean, and we'll get back to there. We'll follow them for a while, but the Teleri remained in Beleriand because they were looking for their king, who had gone off without actually telling anyone.
Dang, ADD. Hush, right.
Yeah, hashtag, not incel for life or something. Hashtag, yeah.
Hashtag ADD, oh shiny.
Hashtag ADD, oh shiny. Anyway, the other two people arrived in Valinor, and the Valar decided that because the elf would really like to be able to see the stars still, in the great Pelori mountain that they had walled their continent with, they made one great pass with a great hill in the middle. And on that great hill, the elves raised a big city, Tirion. The hill is called Tuna. They raised the great city of Tirion, the first great elven city, made of stone, the first example of what we would start calling elven architecture, obviously inspired by the Valar, but that was where the Noldor and the Vanya settled in the earliest days, ruled over primarily by Ingve.
Yeah.
From one side, they could see the light of the trees and go into Valinor. From the other side, they could see the starlight out over the ocean. So they had the best of both worlds, and things were Things were good for a while. However, the Teleri was still stuck in Beleriand. They were eventually developed into a couple of groups. There was the primary group under Ulve, the second king, who was in the coastlands waiting for Ulmo to come back with the damn island one more time. And then there were two other groupings hunting for Elve. Now, one of the groups eventually found him and, went under his and Melian's rulership and founded the kingdom of Doriath. The thing is, they didn't tell anyone either. Apparently, Melian likes her secret or just likes having her toys around because, again, no one thought about sending a single goddamn emissary to the other Teleri saying, hey, we're up here, guys. I intend to stay here. Elve, of course, were very much eager to see the trees again and Valinor, but as it's described, he could see the light of the trees in the eyes of his wife. So he decided to stay with her in Doriath, and a lot of his people gathered there with him, creating the first great real elven kingdom on Middle-earth. Like, actual proper elven kingdom on Middle-earth. Later, with the help of the dwarves, they dug out their capital city, or their capital planet, called Menegroth, the Thousand Caves. Probably some natural limestone caves around a forest river that was then dug out and expanded. But Menegroth and Doriath is going to be of supreme importance later. So it's important to get this out of the way. The other group we haven't quite mentioned yet was under a fellow by the name of Círdan. Now, anyone who has read anything about The Lord of the Rings or Tolkien myth will recall this name. Círdan might have been one of the first elves to awaken at Guivienen, and he was certainly one of the family members of Elve and Ulve, probably their cousin or uncle or some such, or by marriage, I don't know. He and his people kept searching for Elve without finding him because, again, he was with Melian and didn't feel like talking to people. There we go.
There we are.
Eventually, there is more to it. We are skipping minor parts of the narrative because we're not going over this in a narrative sense. We're going over this in this one and probably the next week as well are going to be very, very much this happened for people who haven't read the Silmarillion, so we can have all of these things in order when we get into the very meat of the narrative. Yes. In probably another couple of weeks. But anyway, eventually Ulmo came and brought Ulve and his people also to Valinor. Now, they had become happy living at the seashore, so they didn't want to go to Tirion with the rest. Instead, they built their own city just outside the Pelori Mountains called Swan Harbor, so they could live under the stars still at the sea, and they started becoming shipbuilders, and very good shipbuilders. This, however, still left Círdan. He had been looking for Elve without finding him, and when he actually said, okay, well, we got to go back and go to Valinor, he arrived at the seashore exactly when the last light sort of to be seen on the island pulled by Ulmo vanished over the horizon. Poor bastard, honestly.
Yeah, I would say.
So he was then with his people. Fuck. Anyway, I will follow that light even if it's the last thing that I do. I will build a ship and I will sail after it because and right. that's when Ulmo decides to, no, I don't think so. Probably because he, or maybe even have been from Mandos himself, but it was presumably from Ulmo. Anyway, the Valar basically sent him a vision saying, no, this is bad. You should stay here a while, and you should become a great shipbuilder because the time will come when someone is going to need a ship. Building a ship to get across the great ocean is still beyond your skill. But if you train hard and stick around, someone will come who's going to need that ship, really need it, and when that time comes, and now I'm alone. Chat, I hope you enjoy hearing my voice, because Maddie dropped out as well.
I did it again. Sorry.
You have a tendency of doing that.
Oh God, ADD. I'm just blaming my ADD. I will blame my ADD.
I mean, if LV can do it, then so can you. Anyway, Kieran was told, stay here, get better at building ships. There will come one someday who is going to need the peak of your skill, even if it takes you ages and ages and ages. And Kieran decided to say, okay, I'm going to do that. And his people became the Falathrim. If you see the part next to the sea called Falas, this was where they stayed in 2 great harbors. Because Kieran likes living in harbors. Lately, of course, he lived in the Grey Harbor area. Or the Grey Havens, which is harborages. Eventually, he and his people got in contact with Elve in Doriath. So that was good. They actually finally realized where he is, and the 2 realms, the 2 kingdoms became allies. It is at this point that Thingol, now Elve, now reinvigorated by his Maya wife, decided to. His hair became grey, his eyes became shining, and he started wearing a big grey cloak. And he became known as Thingol, the Grey Cloak, King Grey Cloak. From now on, if I refer to Thingol, I am referring to Elve. And I will not be referring to Elve anymore. It's Thingol from now on, King of Doriath, husband of Melian, and the great Elven King. His people became known as the Sindar. The Sindar are the Grey Elves, the Middle Elves. They are the Light Elves of Valinor. There are the Sindar, the Grey Elves of Beleriand, and there are the Dark Elves of the rest of Middle-earth. At this point, those are the 3 great divisions of the elves, and they are primarily divided into such by language. The language, because elves are great language smiths, of course, separated. The Moriquendi, the Avari, probably spoke something like the original Elven language modified by whatever they got in contact with. The Sindar spoke a modified version of what Tolkien would describe as the Elven Latin, the high tongue of the elves. In The Lord of the Rings, when people are speaking Elvish, they are speaking Sindar. Sindarin became super important later because it was the dominant language of Thingol, and Thingol was basically the High King of Beleriand. So even when some of the Light Elves from Valinor later came back, even though they had their own language, they would start speaking Sindar amongst themselves. Kind of like how Roman nobles would speak Greek as the great language of nobility and antiquity, and then, Roman amongst themselves and to talk with their people. And then, of course, the language in Valinor eventually became Quenya, which is the high Elvish language, the Elf Latin. It's the one that the great elves usually wrote their books in, but they didn't speak it. But this is all getting confusing. I hate to say educate yourself, shitlords, but you can look it up on various wikis, the difference between the language. The point is, we have the Light Elves in Valinor, they are speaking Quenya. We have the Grey Elves in Beleriand speaking Sindarin. And then we have the Moriquendi and Avari and the rest of Middle-earth who are speaking, we don't know, to be honest. Before this
we just don't know what it is.
You will remember me talking about Lenve earlier. Him and his people didn't want to cross the Misty Mountains, but went south along the Anduin and eventually settled what would later become the Wood Elf realms of Mirkwood and Lothlorien and various other outposts. However, a group of them under Lenve's son Denethor, yes, the same name as the steward from The Lord of the Rings, if there was one thing Gondor was good at, it was naming their rulers after great figures from antiquity legend. So this Denethor, the original Denethor, eventually took his people into the area of Beleriand. They basically went so far down the Anduin they could get up through the pass of Rohan. So they didn't have to cross the mountains, and eventually they still wanted to go somewhat west. So eventually they crossed in to Beleriand and settled. Can you go back to the Beleriand map?
Yeah. Let me if I figure out what tab I had that in. Okay. I got lots of tabs open now. All right, here we go. And 3, 2, 1, flip.
Hey! Over on the right side of the map, between a great river and the mountains, there is Osiriand, the land of the 7 rivers. This is a great forested woodland with the rivers running through. Denethor and his people settled there and became the Lyquendi, the Green Elves. Basically forest elves. They're basically, again, the wood elves of Mirkwood and Lothlorien only in Beleriand. They also came under the high kingship of Thingol in Doriath. But they stayed just like Círdan in Falas. Denethor and Osirian was under the high kingdom of Thingol in Doriath, but they retained their own kingdoms, sort of for internal. Which is the prettiest sounding one? Christine, prettiest sounding of what?
Elven languages.
Oh, that's in my opinion, it's Quenya.
Yeah.
It just fits my narrative. It just fits my narrative style. Fits my narrative style better. That's what that is. But it's difficult to. I've never. Unlike many others, just like if I was a Trekkie, I probably wouldn't bother actually learning Klingon. I've never actually learned to speak the Elvish languages. I can read them to a certain degree, as long as I get them in English rather than in Elven script. But I can't speak them, but I really like Quenya. Anyway, I know we've only been going an hour, but I think we might need to stop here.
Okay.
Because we got done what we needed to have done, or at least stop with the primary thing. We got all the elves where they need to be. We have the Lyquendi and the Falas and the Sindar in Beleriand. We have the Teleri in Swanhaven, and we have the Vanya and the Noldor in Tyrion.
Mm-hmm.
And next time, the narrative is about to start up again with a vengeance. And this fellow Feanor that I have been referring to a lot will finally make his actual appearance for good and evil.
Okay.
So I think we should stop here and see if... Is there anything from chat you want us to talk... Is there anything in chat you guys want us to talk about just before we end?
Yeah,
Or Matt, do you have something you want to ask, talk, discuss, opinionate on?
I've been being educated and having things because reading the Silmarillion without having anybody to speak to it with it's a bit to take in the language and the imagery and how everything is happening and stuff. But the way you're describing it makes it a whole lot easier to understand.
All right. Yeah.
So yeah. I don't have any questions because you are a wonderful teacher when it comes to this stuff.
This map you have here, by the way, hold on to that because we are so going to need it, not next show, but the show afterwards, I think.
Okay.
Right now, I'm going to take a bio break. Again, chat, if there's anything you want to ask or have clarified or want us to talk about or whatever, now is the time. But I'll just take a quick bio break and we'll see what happens, if anything has happened when I come back.
Okay. I will take this time to direct everybody to the description box where you can find my hosts' information on where to find them. And also, all kinds of information about the content that I do, my blogs, blog posts, and how to support the channel, and all the content that I create. Yes, that's a shameless plug. We are, for those of you that are new to the stream, walking through and breaking down the Silmarillion to make it a little easier to understand for those that have read it and have questions, and to explain it in, well, somewhat of a layman's terms for those of you that haven't read it and are curious to learn more about Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth in general, as well as the entire world that Tolkien created. So we are going through his whole legendarium. We did start the stream, for those of you that came in late, paying our respects to Christopher Tolkien, who passed away on January 15th at the age of 95. And we also had a little bit more news on the Lord of the Rings series that's going to be on Amazon Prime, which is actually going to be taking place in the Second Age under strict ruling, and looks like it has a premiere year of 2021. They still haven't narrowed down the series premiere date, but we're looking at next year before the first season of that series on Amazon Prime comes out. So you guys have been recapped. We have also gone through the lineage of all the elves, who they are, who their kings were, how they split up, and so forth.
And I'm back.
All right. So does anybody have any questions before? I'm going to give it maybe 30 seconds to a minute before we do anything else. Let's see. If there are no questions after about a minute, then we'll just go ahead and end it here. This stream normally airs at noon Central Standard Time. The reason it is an hour, you started an hour late, for those of you wondering. My husband came home about an hour and a half before the stream started, and neither one of us had eaten yet. And I don't like eating on stream. So we just kind of postponed it until 1 p.m. But this is a stream that airs every Sunday at noon Central, 1 Eastern. That is U.S. Standard Time. So please adjust to your time frame wherever you are in the world. If you have any questions or would like us to answer anything at the beginning of the next stream, you can DM me, or you can tag any one of the three of us that you see in the description box on Twitter, and we will put that in the show map for next week.
Yep.
Christine wants to know if there's any physical or mystical differences to the types of elves.
No, not. I mean, yes and no. Again, those who have been in Valinor have sort of been... I mean, Valinor is basically heaven, or the Elysian field from Greek mythology, or Valhalla from Nordic mythology, like paradise on Earth to a certain degree. Now, all elves are, at least in effect, greater than humans, just because they are the unfallen. We've been through this before. The reason elves are better than humans are not because they were meant to be like that. It's because, well, it was, but it's basically because they are basically, again, this is Tolkien's Catholic faith playing in. They are basically humans as they were, as we would have been without the original sin, without original sin, like perfected.
Yeah.
So elves are generally, to a certain degree, better than humans, and elves who have been in Valinor are that step greater again because they have lived with the Valar. They have lived in paradise. They have... You can't say they have absorbed the light of the trees or so on, but they have been ennobled by their time in paradise. So there's no... I mean, you wouldn't really be able to tell a major difference between the various elf subspecies, but you would know if you had a light elf or high elf from Valinor against someone else. You would just be able to see it in the light of their eyes, their posture, just the brightness of their spirit, so to speak. But it's not really a mystical difference on a essential level more than it is a difference of circumstances. Any elf who would have spent time living in Valinor, no, Eve Elf did not get upset with Elf Adam. No, in fact, no, indeed not. The original sin of the elves, if you want to put it like that, is actually not happening yet. Insofar as the elves had an original sin, it will actually come in either the next show or the show after that. So it's not as if they didn't have that. I was speaking in a sort of metaphysical sense as unfallen, because the elves are absolutely fallen. They were put to their test, and a lot of them failed it miserably.
Those
But yeah, I think that's it. Again, if there isn't anything else, then I think we should probably call it a day.
All right. Well, as I like to say, same bat time, same bat channel next week, except it'll be noon instead of 1 Central Standard Time. So we hope to see you guys here. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can tag us on Twitter and ask. We will write them down and put them in the show map for next week and answer them before we continue. If we don't answer the questions, we will explain to you why we're not, because chances are you may or may not run into a question of something we haven't covered yet. So There's always that. So until next time, my friends, this has been, well, Skep was here. This is Lovable Sage and myself saying behave, but if you can't behave, at least be good at it. Have a good day, evening, or night, everyone.
Bye!